The landslide is absolutely still active. I myself documented it with my phone while I was carrying out the inspection.
Down below, it's like the ground is broken. You can't even walk on it. It's extremely worrying.
At exactly 1 p.m. on a quiet Sunday afternoon, 500 people had exactly 4 minutes to grab whatever they could carry and run for their lives. The earth beneath their homes had just started sliding toward a river, and nobody knew when it would stop. This is the story of Niscemi, Sicily, and what happens when nature decides to reclaim the land we've built our lives upon. January 25, 2026. Families throughout the small Santa Croce neighborhood were doing what Italian families do best on Sundays. They were gathering around tables, preparing elaborate lunches, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Then came a sound that would change everything. A deep, guttural rumble rose from somewhere beneath their feet. Not the sharp jolt of an earthquake, something far more unsettling, a continuous grinding noise that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth itself. When residents rushed to their windows, they witnessed something that defies belief. The asphalt outside their homes was splitting apart in real time, cracks spreading across the street like veins on a leaf. One resident described it as watching someone slowly tear a sheet of paper in half, except the paper was solid pavement. Here's what genuinely disturbed me when I started digging into this story. Several residents actually went outside to investigate. They stood on that cracking asphalt and felt the ground physically trembling beneath their shoes. The earth wasn't shaking side to side like in an earthquake. It was moving forward, sliding inch by inch toward the Beneficio stream below. Within minutes, 500 people became refugees in their own city. 500! That's an entire neighborhood, an entire community, forced to abandon everything they owned in less time than it takes to watch a single episode of your favorite show. The mayor of Niscemi, Massimiliano Conti, went live on social media shortly after. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He called it a dramatic landslide event. Now, when a mayor who walks those streets every day, who knows that terrain intimately, chooses the word dramatic, you know the situation has crossed into genuinely dangerous territory. Videos captured by fleeing residents look like something pulled from a Hollywood disaster film. Asphalt splitting open, walls buckling and collapsing, and underneath it all, that relentless, bone-chilling sound of millions of tons of earth grinding downhill.
Losing a house is unbelievable. We've had it for 100 years. It belonged to my grandparents, but that's how it is. My house was historic.
But here's where this story takes an even darker turn. This wasn't the first landslide to hit Niscemi. It wasn't even the first one that month. Just 9 days earlier, on January 16th, another massive landslide struck the same region. And when I say massive, I need you to understand the scale we're talking about. That first landslide had a front stretching 1.6 kilometers wide. That's roughly a full mile of earth simultaneously giving way. Think about 20 soccer fields arranged in a single line. Then picture that entire stretch of land simply detaching and sliding downhill. Sicily's Regional Civil Protection conducted initial surveys and determined that the total affected area covered approximately 1 square kilometer. That's the equivalent of 140 soccer fields worth of terrain that just decided to relocate itself. The scarps, those step-like formations that appear when earth cracks and shifts, reached heights of 20 to 23 feet. We're talking about vertical drops the height of a complete 2-story building appearing overnight in people's backyards. Provincial Road 12 didn't just crack, it was obliterated. The pavement split completely in half, with each section displaced to entirely different elevations. The methane gas lines feeding homes throughout the area ruptured. The fiber optic cables providing internet to the entire region were severed. 35 families had to evacuate from the Belvedere Canal area before they even knew if their homes would survive the night. And the truly terrifying part? The movement didn't stop. Technicians installed monitoring equipment and watched helplessly as the soil continued its slow, relentless march toward the Moroggio River Valley for days afterward. So what triggered this catastrophe? What turned stable ground into a flowing river of mud and debris? Enter Cyclone Harry, the invisible villain of this entire nightmare.
No, no.
Between January 18th and 21st, just 1 week before the second devastating landslide, Harry slammed into Sicily's coast with a ferocity the region hadn't experienced in 6 decades. Some areas of neighboring Calabria recorded 570 millimeters of rainfall in just 72 hours. That's over 22 inches of water falling from the sky in 3 days. Let me put that number into perspective. The average annual precipitation in parts of Sicily ranges from 400 to 600 millimeters. Harry dumped an entire year's worth of rain onto the region in a single weekend. 12 months of precipitation compressed into 72 hours. The regional director of Calabria's civil protection called it a once-in-a-century event, and the data backs him up completely. A buoy positioned between Sicily and Malta recorded waves reaching 16 meters high during the storm. That's 52 feet. For context, that's taller than a 5-story building. It's officially the largest wave ever recorded in the history of the Mediterranean Sea. All that water that battered the coast? It also fell inland. It fell on Niscemi. It soaked into every crack and pore of the soil until the ground simply couldn't hold anymore. And what happens when you pour half a meter of water onto terrain that's already geologically unstable? You create a ticking time bomb waiting for the slightest trigger. The situation in Niscemi right now is nothing short of desperate. The city has become virtually isolated from the rest of Sicily, and understanding why requires looking at the transportation nightmare that's unfolded. Provincial Road 10, which connected the Pontio Levo neighborhood to downtown Niscemi, was completely closed after today's landslide. Provincial Road 12 has been blocked since January 16th because of the first landslide. That leaves exactly one road, Provincial 11, as the only way in or out of the city. Think about what that means. 25,000 people, an entire community funneled through a single access route to reach the state road connecting to Gela and Catania. If anything happens to that last remaining road, Niscemi becomes completely cut off from the rest of the island. The Pallor Sports Palace, normally home to basketball games and community events, has been transformed into a massive emergency shelter. The regional civil protection mobilized everything they had. Hundreds of camp beds were trucked in from Palermo. 70 volunteers descended on the site to help displaced families find food, water, and a place to sleep. The department head is personally on the ground coordinating operations in direct communication with the regional president. Schools have been closed indefinitely, not for a day or two, until further notice, until someone can guarantee the ground won't swallow them whole. The detail that haunts me most from survivor testimonies: nobody can tell these families when they'll be allowed to return home, if they'll be allowed to return home. Understanding why Niscemi specifically faces this level of danger requires a quick geology lesson. The region sits on what experts call clay sand units. It's a mixture of clay and sand forming extremely unstable sedimentary layers. Clay performs reasonably well when dry, maintaining its structure and supporting weight, but when it absorbs water, it transforms completely. It loses all cohesion, becoming essentially a thick paste that can no longer support the layers above it. Niscemi has another strike against it. The area is historically known for Calanchi phenomena, deep ravines carved by constant erosion over decades and centuries. The terrain has been slowly wearing away for generations. And there's one more factor that seals the region's fate. The entire zone sits on a slope descending toward the Moroggio River Valley. Gravity itself is working against these communities, constantly pulling everything downward. Unstable soil, saturated with unprecedented rainfall, on a steep slope, already weakened by centuries of erosion. It's the perfect storm for exactly the disaster we're witnessing. The older residents knew this was coming in a way. Their collective memory holds the trauma of 1997, when almost exactly 29 years ago, the same area suffered a similar landslide. History has repeated itself, only this time with even greater intensity. So what happens now? What are authorities doing to address this ongoing crisis? First and foremost, continuous monitoring. Technicians from the Regional Civil Protection and Italy's Research Institute for Hydrogeological Protection have installed measuring equipment throughout the affected zones. They need to determine if the soil movement has stopped or if it's still active. This is crucial to understand. Landslides aren't like earthquakes. An earthquake strikes and it's over. Landslides can continue moving for days, weeks, sometimes months. Nobody can declare any area safe until they confirm the earth has stopped sliding. The Minister of Civil Protection has guaranteed full support from the national government. Technical teams from Rome have been dispatched to support local personnel. Resources are flowing in from across the country, and there's a critical investigation underway right now. Specialists are working to determine whether there's a direct correlation between the January 16th landslide and today's event. Is this the same movement expanding its reach, or are these two separate geological failures? The answer will determine everything about how they respond going forward. For the 500 families sleeping in emergency shelters tonight, these questions aren't academic. They're the difference between eventually returning to the homes they've built their lives in and starting over from nothing. The ground beneath Niscemi has spoken. The question now is whether anyone was listening before it was too late, and whether we'll listen before the next community faces the same fate. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.